Good evening and welcome to Fishhawk Live and the Great Lakes Fishing Podcast. Tonight we're going to welcome in Captain Marc Kulak. Captain Marc, how are we doing tonight?
I'm fantastic. How you doing, Chris?
Just living the dream, just living the dream. So Captain Marc is a charter captain with King's Landing Sport Fishing. He's been on the show before. We welcome him back tonight. He fishes on Lake Ontario out of Bluffers Park in the Toronto area. And once again, another pleasure to have him on there. And if anybody out there has any questions for Marc, we'd love to hear the questions tonight. We're going to be talking about slide divers, but if you have any questions for Captain Marc, I'm sure he'd be happy to answer those for you. So drop them in there. If we get a bunch of questions, we'll go ahead and pick the question of the evening to win a nice little prize pack from Fishhawk. So Marc, I'm planning to do some more tackle related type shows in the next few weeks. And, we had you on the show earlier this year, and I just love watching your YouTube channel. I actually watch it all the time, and I saw your series on slide divers, and it was I really enjoyed it. I wanted to have you on the show to talk about those. First of all, tell us what is a slide diver?
So a slide diver, it's I think many people are familiar with the concept of a diver, and really it's about it's another way to get your baits down deep, but it also allows you to take the baits away from the boat. What is unique and different to a slide diver, and I've got one on a rod here, is typically when you're running another diver, a standard diver, you've got your divers at the end of the line, and then you're running usually a 5, 6, 7, 8 foot leader, but to your flasher or your flasher fly rig, and that's really limited because if you try and run your leader much longer, so I fish with someone that he likes to run a 15, 20 foot leader. You're hand bombing that leader at the end. And the slide diver is different. What the slide diver does, and like you see this in the rod, the slide diver actually slides up and down your fishing line here. And that's where it gets the name slide diver. So similar concept to a regular diver, like a dipsy diver, but it's actually attached to the rod. It's on the fishing line, and you essentially can let out almost as much line as you want. If you choose to have a 8 foot lead between that diver and your spoon, or that diver and your flasher, you can. If you want to have a 40 foot lead, you can. That's really the crux of the biggest difference between a slide diver and really where it gets its name, slide diver, from.
Yeah, that's a really cool concept, and it's that a lot of people would like to use. And one thing that I think that a lot of people that are getting new into the sport, and we're seeing more and more of that with people that are, taking out kind of their boat, their, 18, 19 trailerable size boats out there. Maybe they don't have downriggers, and this is a way for them to get their baits deeper. You talked about just the fact of with something like a dipsy, you're kind of limited in how long that leader can be. Are there any other kind of major differences between a slide diver and that type of diver?
I'd say that the slider is probably the biggest difference that I would find, except for I've got a couple of slide divers here in the packages. I'd say slide diver does make a few different models. So this is the model I use a lot when I'm salmon and trout fishing, and it's their standard clear diver. They have different rings you can add to the divers, and then they also have I think they call it their extreme or ultimate ring with an ultimate weight, so allows you to get down deeper. So that's the kind of standard one, and the one I use most of the time. That being said, they also have the slide diver light bite, and this one, this is actually something I when I first started using slide divers, I used these, and I'd say where I think personally these come into play is when you're fishing for smaller fish or fish that don't strike as hard. So when I think about if I'm walleye fishing, or if I'm maybe fishing a lot for lake trout, I use these because similar concept to a slide as the regular slide diver. The line still goes through, but what happens is you got this arm at the back, Chris, and your fishing line comes out of the your fishing line to the flasher comes out and through this to the flasher. And what happens is when the fish hits, this pops down and releases it. And what this does is with those smaller fish that may not hit as hard, the weight will actually release this and trip the diver. And many people, whether it be running dipsy diver or sometimes even a slide diver, if you get a really small fish or a light biting fish, sometimes you won't know it's there. That's where I'd say the slide diver light bite can have its edge or its angle. For me, I don't use these ones as much. I'm a big fan of the standard ones, the clear ones. I'm fishing for king salmon on Lake Ontario. They hit like a freight train, and I find don't need to worry about that piece.
But if somebody's out there, and I've actually heard people fishing out on Green Bay for perch using those light bite slide divers. So I mean, it's a really good tool for people who are fishing other types of species. You talked a little bit about kind of what happens when the fish hits the slide diver. Can you tell us a little bit about what it would be like to reel in a fish using a slide diver compared to maybe another means of getting that line down?
So that, Chris, that is the game changer. That is the advantage to a slide diver versus a standard diver. I started using slide divers when I was fishing on my 17-foot Springbok aluminum boat. And why I started using slide divers, I'd fish with myself and a buddy, or myself and my father. And when I was running a standard diver with a 6-8 foot lead, and I do like to run a longer lead, so I'd have an 8-foot lead. Then I'd have my call it 11 to 13 inch flasher. Then I would have another 6, 7, 8 foot lead on the meat rig. I had a lot of line between that diver and the fish. And it became chaotic to often try to net those fish at the back of the boat. I remember this is years ago, but I remember having my buddy standing on the bow of the boat on this 17-foot open aluminum so we could actually have the fish at the back of the transom to net the fish. And, it became chaotic, and, we used to often name bringing a fish in on a diver the situation rod, because it was always chaotic. And then, often there's times when fish are spookier, so you start extending that lead out. Like I said, I've got a friend of mine that him and I often fish tournaments together, and we would fish in his boat, and he would like to run a 20+ foot lead. That becomes a real situation at the back of the boat. So that's when I started running slide divers on my 17-footer. But as I've evolved to my larger boats now and running charters, the benefit to the slide diver really still continues. And what that is, when that, and I kind of show it here, when that fish hits and the diver unclips, the diver is going to slide right all the way down to essentially your flasher. So when it comes to netting the fish, you've got no lead. Like if you're running a flasher fly, if you're running like a standard, spin doctor with 3 times the flasher leader, so call it 24 inches, you've literally got to worry about 30 inches, 32 inches of gear at the end of that diver, and then you got to fish. If you're running a meat rig, maybe got 5 or 6 feet. That's the real benefit. When it comes to netting fish, that diver slides right down, and you're netting the fish. You are not worrying about trying to hand bomb a dipsy leader at the back of the boat. There's so many fish were lost trying to hand bomb that dipsy leader at the back of the boat, because I don't need to tell you, when the fish see the boat, they often go crazy. And, with a long dipsy leader, that's often when that leader is in your hands. I don't want a crazy fish when that line's in my hand.
So you've been talking about a lot of the advantages of using a slide diver, Mark. Is there something that you can point out that's like, well, this is kind of a downside of it, or a disadvantage to using a slide diver?
I think some people would say that one disadvantage they have is it's attached to the rod. So if you're someone that likes to run all different types of dipsy divers, and you believe that you want this purple one with this rig, and you want this green with the other rig, that's not as easy, because the diver is attached to the rod. And slide diver, they only make a few colors. I think they've got green, black, clear, white, or glow, and chrome. So that might be one disadvantage some can perceive. I have come up with a bit of a setup where I can swap them pretty quickly. Like I've got a smaller diver here, and I've got the leader all wrapped up on a spool. This is an old torpedo, wire spool, and then I've got some braid, a very thin braid. And what I'll do is I can basically swap this out super quickly, where I tie this to the braid on the rod, and just pull it through, get the line on, and then just do a quick snip, and we've swapped it over. So I've come up with a couple of ways to do a quick change, but that would be the one downside some people could consider. Personally, I don't think it's a downside. You know, if you look at, I've got 2 of my 4 wire diver rods here that I run slide divers on, and I only run slide divers. I got 2 of them here. You'll notice they've both got clear divers. This one's a mag, this one's just a regular. They're both clear. I do not want the fish to see or be bothered by the diver. I'm either going to run clear or I'm going to run black. So for me, doesn't matter. And if you talk to any tackle shop, they'll probably tell you the 2 most popular colors of diver they sell are black and clear.
Yeah, and that was something that you and I had talked about kind of before the show, is using that clear when you're using a slide diver. The reason you're using is you want to get your bait away from the diver and not be close to it. And that was something that you said you don't want the fish to be attracted to the diver.
Yeah, Chris, you know me. Like, I love to customize everything. I paint all my own flashers. I paint my own spoons. I painted my own divers in the past. I've played around making different inserts that go in between the diver, and I now just run clear. Like, you know, the only time that I really want the diver to come into play, in my opinion, is if I'm running a spoon. If I'm running a spoon, then I want to use the diver as an attractor, and that's when I'll have that spoon on a leader. Like in here, I got a spoon in here. I have that spoon on a leader that I'll use, and then that's when I may add some color to that slide diver. That's when I may use like the green, or I may use like a glow or a white, or put an insert in that slide diver because I want it to act as an attractant. But that's the only time. If I'm running it with like a meat rig or something, it's not about the diver, it's about the rig.
Very good. Starting to get a few questions in. And the next kind of question I wanted to ask you is, a lot of people, they use wire on their diver rods. Do you have to run wire? And that's kind of Larry Dyshaw comes in. He wants to know, how do they work if you're using braid?
So actually, I'd say using them with braid is the easiest way, because when you actually buy a slide diver, it comes with a little kit of a little spring, some tubing, and some silicone. That's part of the setup. And it's the tubing is made for braid, and the spring is made for when you run it with mono. So no problem at all running it with braid. That's actually part of its standard setup. It actually gets a little bit more complicated when you run it with wire, because the diver itself cannot slide on the wire. They cannot slide on the 7-strand or the 19-strand wire, because it'll damage it, it'll fray it. So what you actually do so both these rods next to me are wire. But what you'll notice, and this one's literally come right off my boat. You can still see there's some fleas here on the line. I've actually got braid tied onto this. So what happens is I've got wire, and then I use an Albright knot to connect to 70-pound braid. And I've put 30 feet of 70-pound braid on. And then what happens is this particular diver, this is one of my ultimates with the heavy weight and the large ring. The diver actually slides on the braid. So in this particular case, the most I can let out in front of the diver is 30 feet, because that's what I have for braid. I typically don't let out more than 30 feet, so I'm completely happy with that. So that's one way. The other setup I've got here, and this is what I've been playing around a lot this year on, is same thing, 7-strand wire, but I've actually attached monofilament onto this. And I've got a 30 feet of 40-pound monofilament on this particular rod. And the slide diver slides on the monofilament on that particular rod. And it was something I was testing because, personally, it's a bit of a debate, when it comes to guys that run divers. Do you use a snubber or do you not use a snubber? And myself, when it came to running a wire diver, whether it was with a slide diver or a regular diver, you'll see I'm running a snubber. So on a slide diver, I run the snubber right before the flasher. Works great. But what I wanted to play with this year is if I actually put monofilament on instead. Mono's got that natural stretch, that natural give in it. How did that work out? Let me tell you, I'll be running all monofilament on my slide divers next year. And I was a guy that swore by having a braid section. I find it was much, much easier for customers to fight the fish with that 30-foot section of monofilament that the diver slid on versus the 30-foot braid section with a bungee type snubber. So that's but yeah, to answer Larry's question, no problems running it with braid. I've got a couple of rods that are braid diver rods that I use in the spring that I'll use with the small little divers. Those are braid. The only reason I don't use braid most of the season, on Lake Ontario, we get the spiny water fleas, and they stick really badly to the braid. So that's why I run wire most of the time. But yeah, no problems.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that? What is the purpose of that snubber? What is the purpose? Why do we need that little stretch? Kind of go through that and why that's important.
Yeah, well, I think with braid or with wire, and this is one of those opinion things where there's quite a debate. But with braid or wire, in my opinion, when you've got a really feisty, angry salmon on the end, they get really aggressive, and they're thrashing all over the place. And while you can you can massage the drag to try and make it as smooth as possible, when you've got folks on the boat like many of us that are charter captains, you know it's terrible when you see a customer literally they're being pulled into the water by that salmon and the rod's jerking all over the place. So the snubber, it tries to absorb that shock and make it easier on the angler on the rod, but also by absorbing that shock, it's hopefully not the hook's not hopefully pulling the mouth of the fish and making that hole larger and larger, and therefore hopefully not losing a fish. Not a scientific test, but I had a rod that I ran without a snubber 3 seasons ago, all season without a snubber, and one with a snubber. And we lost way more fish on the one without a snubber versus the one with a snubber. And now, all my slide diver rods that are braid have snubber. This season, I put one rod, my deep rod. I put the monofilament on, and I like it much better. So I personally feel when you're running braid, you're running wire diver, there is zero stretch, zero give in that line, and I feel that you lose more fish as the fish thrash around and open up that hole where the hook is. So I'm a fan of having something that has some give, like a snubber or like some monofilament. It's another reason why sometimes people don't use fluorocarbon leader with braid, because they want some stretch. And if they run fluorocarbon leader with braid, same thing. There's zero stretch.
Larry's got a follow up. I think you did cover it, but if you can go over it again, what pound mono he's asking, and also I think you said 80-pound braid.
70 or 80-pound braid is what I tie on when I'm running the braid with 7-strand wire. If it's a straight braid rod, you can probably get away with 30, 40, 50 pound. But I'm running 70 or 80 as that leader section that the diver slides on when I'm running with 7-strand, because if I run braid too thin and tie it to the 7-strand wire, the wire will cut the braid. So I find you need to be in that thicker 70 or 80-pound range. Heck, I've even ran 100-pound braid because I don't want it to get cut by the wire. When it comes to my monofilament section on here, I just took some monofilament from my rigger rods. My rigger rods that I use for flashers and flasher flies, they've got 40-pound monofilament, so that's what I'm using on this.
And are you seeing any cuts there? Randy Beavis wants to know, does that wire cut into the monofilament the same way?
That's a really good question, and something I missed out with saying. I run a probably 12-inch section of that 70 or 80-pound braid between the wire and the monofilament.
Okay, very cool.
Because I do worry that if I was to go directly between the monofilament and the wire, it would cut it.
All right. Ron Winter, he's been on the show before and will probably be on the show here in the next few weeks. He'd like to know, do you have better hookups on the traditional Dipsy versus the slide diver with Kings?
I don't, my view is I think is that the hookup is the same. Like if the fish is going to bite, it's going to, if the fish bites, I think the hookup's probably similar. Where I think the advantage is, with that long leader, I'm not fighting a thrashing fish at the back of the boat and don't lose the fish, I think, as often with a slide diver. That's my first opinion. The second thing I would say, and this is probably not about hookups, but I'm of the personal belief that as in the morning when the fish are really aggressive and actively feeding, you probably don't need to have a super long lead. And as many times in the morning, I'll throw the slide diver out 6, 8, 10 foot, and I send it, because you know what? The fish are aggressively biting, and it's not going to make a difference. As the sun comes up, especially with the water out, it's getting clearer and clearer, I think the fish get spooky, and I do not want that diver to be in their way. There's many times, even with standard divers, the downriggers stop working as the day progresses, or they're not as productive, and the divers fire up. But I'm a firm believer with a slide diver, they perform even better when in the high sun and those times where the fish get spookier, because you don't actually have this diver attracting them and essentially spooking the fish. So that's where I think it's less about the hookup. I do personally feel that there are times when the slide divers just perform better when it comes to actually catching the fish. My first year running slide divers, oh my gosh, it was probably 2014, 2015. I'd been to the Lotsa show in Niagara Falls. I met Eric from Slide Diver. He sold me on them. I bought a few and I came back. And the next year, I like to test things, as I mentioned earlier. So I would run my 2 divers and one to be a regular diver and one was a slide diver. And I tell you, the slide diver kept performing better and better. And now anyone that's been on my boat will tell you it's slide divers or no diver.
All right. You got that little deal on the bottom with the numbers. People getting started. How do you know how deep those slide divers are running when you're putting them out?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying if you're running a regular regular slide diver with a regular ring on it, it's very similar to a standard dipsy. And the general rule of thumb on them is around 3-to-1. You want to get 50 feet down, let out 140 to 150 feet. With the ultimate, which has got the large ring, the large weight, it's very similar to a mag dipsy. A lot of people go with a 2-to-1. I've actually I have a Fishhawk TD, so I've done some testing with the Fishhawk TD, and I found that with 230 feet out with a ultimate ring, ultimate weight, so the heavy weight, large ring on a 7-strand setup, I find 230 feet out at a 2.1, 2.2 trolling speed was getting me down 100 feet. So in my mind, it's kind of like a 2.3-to-1 when I'm using that mag diver. And then I did a similar test with the standard diver, and I found it was closer to 3.3-to-1 with the standard weight, standard diver with the regular ring on it, which I'm trying to find somewhere with the regular ring here, which and that's right from using the Fishhawk TD. But again, that'll vary. As you go deeper, you need more lines. So if you're running your divers really high, that 3-to-1 range it goes out of the window, and it's probably closer to 2-to-1.
What does that typical setup look like for you, Mark? I mean, you've got your downriggers. How many divers do you typically set up when you're out there? On each side, what are you kind of running as far as getting all your lines out?
Yeah, so I'm on I fish out of a Tierra 2700, and I'm running a charter boat, and I run the boat solo. I'm on Lake Ontario, but I'm on the Toronto side, so the North Shore. And why that's important is we are limited to 2 rod per angler spread. For me, the most I take out for guests is 5 people, but that's tight on the 2700. So personally, I like to take out 3 or 4. And why that's important is if I'm taking out 4 people plus myself, I'm allowed 10 rods maximum. So for me, typically, I'm running 2 downriggers. I'll run two divers, and then I will run typically 5 long lines. So for me, typically I'm running 2 on each side, and I'm running 1 down the chute, and that gets me to nine rods. And that's more than enough to catch fish. I just don't need any more. So typically, I'm finding I'm running 2 divers. When I have a mate on the boat, I will sometimes put out a double diver. I love running double divers, but it can be chaotic when you're on your own and you're fishing with a number of folks they're not anglers, so they're looking for you to hand them the rod and you to put the fish in the net, and they can't maneuver the rods around. That's the one thing I find when you're running double divers. You got to be on your game, moving rods continuously. Otherwise tangles happen and you lose a lot of gear. And I don't like tangles, and I hate losing gear.
All right. Obviously, Lake Ontario, out of Bluffers, you're a big salmon guy. What are kind of your favorite things to be pulling behind your slide divers for salmon out on Lake Ontario?
So for me, it's when I very, very, very rarely run spoons behind my slide divers. I will do in the spring, especially when I'm running, the little guys like this. But for me, it's slide divers are going to be running flasher with meat, or flasher fly. Like that's what my slide divers are. Typically, I'm all about alternating. So, if I think about my boat, the starboard rigger typically is my high rigger. My port rigger is typically my deep rigger. So then when I flip around, my starboard diver will be my deep diver. So that will have the mag ring. It'll have the heavy weight. And that's typically running a flasher similar to this one here. I've got one of the new Hot Fish 10s. It's got to have something like this down deep, down 200, 230, 250 out, because I want it to be in that 100 plus range. And then the other side, so then the port side, because that's my deep diver, that's my deep rigger, that's now my high diver. And that's typically going to have a flasher fly like this Dreamweaver Spin Doctor Wonder Bread. But for me, it's typically it's flashers and it's flasher meat, flasher fly on the divers on my boat.
Very cool. Mark, it's been good talking to you tonight again about the slide divers. There's something that I didn't ask you tonight about slide divers that you wanted to talk about, or anything in general you wanted to talk about tonight that I didn't ask you about?
When it comes to slide divers, my view is they're pretty awesome. I will tell you that for new folks that first get slide divers, they can be intimidated by the rigging of the slide diver. And I'll tell you, it's not that hard. Whether you go to my channel, King's Landing Sport Fishing, or Slide Divers page or other channels, there's all kinds of great videos on rigging the slide diver. I'll tell you, do not get discouraged by having to run line through a diver. It does feel odd at first. I can tell you, I felt that way when I first started using, but you'll get used to it really, really easily. I'd say when you're first getting used to slide divers, get someone else to help you set it up. And what I mean by that is once it's on your rod, get someone to hold the rod and keep their finger on the line, and then another person can actually hold the diver and pull the number of pulls they want out, set the diver, and then let it out. I found when I first started, 2 people made it much, much easier and far less intimidating. Now, I've got it down to a science. I basically take my rod, I stick it in a rod holder, I grab the diver in my hand, and I flip the bail, and I just start pulling the line out and letting it out the back of the boat. So I'd say that's the one thing I'd say is do not get intimidated when you first put it on and going, how am I going to do this? I got a flasher fly or a flasher meat rig at the end. The wind's blowing it all over the place, and I've got to get this in the water and pull line out. Get a friend to help you. It'll help you tremendously when you're first getting used to it. Once you get addicted to the slide divers, you'll be sold. There was a time last year that I was meant to have a trip canceled, and I was like, you know what, screw it, I'm going fishing. And I went solo, just myself. Like I said, I'm on the Canadian side. I can only run 2 rods. So I started out running a slide diver on one side and a rigger on the other side. And literally like 2 or 3 fish in, it's diver. And, I talked to a lot of friends that they're intimidated to run a dipsy diver when they're fishing solo because of the whole long lead. I'm not intimidated to run a slide diver when I'm fishing solo because I'm not fighting that lead because the diver slid right down. And it makes it easy to net a fish. It's actually, in my opinion, at that point, it's no harder to net than a downrigger fish. But I vividly remember that day because I was probably out there in 3-4 footers solo. So the boat's bouncing up and down. And I threw out two divers and pulled the rigger because the rigger wasn't moving. But the divers were going nuts. Probably a combination between the action of the rods and the 2 rods on the side moving back and forth with the waves, and then just the fish being spooky. The divers were just catching fish to the point that at one point I had a double with slide divers, but I'm not intimidated to do that with a slide diver because I wasn't fighting these huge long leads. So like I said, it can feel intimidating when you first start using them. Once you get them in your program and get them down to a science, they're addictive. And there's many times now if I do fish solo or go out for a few hours and I'm talking to another buddy of mine that's fishing solo, and they'll say, we'll talk about what's working. I'm like, my diver's the one doing all the work. They're like, well, I'm not running a diver. I'm fishing solo. I'm like, well, that's funny. I'm fishing solo and I am running a diver because I'm running a slide diver.
Very cool. Again, we really appreciate you coming on, Mark. I know this is a really busy time of year for you. You're kind of getting ready for next year and breaking things down from last year, or I guess this year. And I really appreciate you taking some time out. If you want to find out more about Captain Mark, you can find him at kingslandingsportfishing.com. He's also got a great Facebook page, and of course his YouTube channel, Kings Landing Sport Fishing, is one of my favorites if you're interested in Great Lakes fishing, which if you're listening to this show, you probably are. So you want to check that out. Thanks again, Captain Mark, and I'm sure we'll have you and see you again in the spring.
My pleasure, Chris. It's great. Thanks so much.